If you've determined that your rotary hook timing or gap are off, follow the instructions in this video. Remove the lower cover that covers the bobbin case area and rotary hook. There are 2 Phillips screws on the underside. Remove them and set the lower cover aside. Remove the bobbin case and use your offset screwdriver to loosen the screws on the needle plate. Remove the screws and remove the needle plate. Also, if you haven't done so, unthread the needle that's above the needle plate. Next, with your machine powered on and at the main screen, go to the main menu, choose Other, and then choose Maintenance. Reconfirm that your rotary hook timing is off by engaging the needle bar by pressing this button to change from jump to drive mode, and press and hold the plus button so that the needle bar comes down as the rotary hook turns. As the needle bar comes down, stop it when it arrives at the lowest point and possibly when it's starting on its way back up. If at any point the needle is striking any part of the rotary hook as you try to bring the needle down, you can stop rotating the main shaft before the needle bar makes contact with the rotary hook assembly. This may or not be the case depending on how far off the timing is. Next, you'll need to loosen the entire rotary hook assembly so that it's riding free on the shaft so that you can turn it by hand and adjust it. The rotary hook is secured onto the shaft by 3 screws. You'll need to loosen them so that you can free the rotary hook so that you can adjust it. On this rotary hook that's not on the machine, you can see more easily that there's a flat spot where there's a screw. You'll want to loosen that, which you can see here. There are also 2 other screws at this position and also this position. We'll want to loosen all 3 of these screws. Take a large flathead screwdriver, the one that comes in your kit is perfect for this. And in loosening the screw, it may be tight, loosen it so that it's just loose. Often this is less than a half a turn of rotation, just so that you can feel that screw come loose. The rotary hook will not be free at this point, but then you can use the plus button to rotate the rotary hook to access the other screws like this. And again, loosen it so it's just broken loose. And then loosen the 3rd screw. Again, taking advantage of the plus button on the control panel. With all 3 just barely loose, loosen it just enough that the rotary hook can now rotate freely because it's no longer locked onto the shaft that it's mounted on. At this point, we can adjust the rotary hook so that it's properly aligned at 25 degrees. With the rotary hook now loose and the needle down but not completely down, move the rotary hook assembly first to make sure that the notch is aligned onto the nub of the retaining finger like this, so that it locks the inner basket from turning as we turn the rotary hook. And as we make our adjustment, make sure from this point on that the rotary hook assembly doesn't back out so far that the notch is free of this retaining finger nub. Next, go ahead and bring the rotary hook point by hand so that it's right at the 12 o'clock position. And at this point, advance the needle bar down further so that it's coming down in front of the rotary hook but behind this metal flange. To do this more safely and slowly, do it by hand using your 3mm X wrench at the back of the machine so that you can turn it slowly like this while holding the rotary hook in place. Turn the main shaft by hand so that it's exactly at 25 degrees at this point. With the dial at 25 degrees, once again bring the point of the rotary hook directly behind the needle and almost touching it. Remember that you're not only aligning the hook point left or right so that the point arrives directly behind the needle, but you're also controlling the distance between the point of the rotary hook and the back of the needle. It must be very close. Once you've aligned the rotary hook point to the back of the needle and also set the gap, carefully hold the rotary hook in place and snug the first screw. Get a screwdriver and just barely snug it. If you haven't done this before, it's a good idea to use a very small screwdriver first, which is less likely to disturb and shift the rotary hook position as you're trying to set it in the correct place. Insert the screwdriver into the slot of the screw, holding the rotary hook in place, being mindful of the very small gap in the left-right position, and just turn it until the screw just stops. Do not torque the screw down. You want just enough torque to hold that in place. With that first screw snug, and if you're satisfied with the position and gap of the rotary hook, you can begin snugging the other screws. One of the other screws will be at the 9 o'clock position on this side of the rotary hook, so it's easy to get to from the left side. And we'll snug that one. And again, in tightening your screws, you just want to turn them so that there is no slack and it's snug. To the unpracticed hand, over tightening these screws at first can risk throwing the rotary hook off. The third screw is at the top, so to get to it we can use the plus button or your wrench to manually turn the rotary hook to get to that third screw and also snug it. Now with all three screws snug, let's recheck the timing to make sure we haven't shifted it in the process of that initial tightening. So get your main shaft back to 25 degrees. Once again, using the plus button to get it as close as you can. And then moving it the rest of the way to 25 degrees by hand. Recheck your timing and gap. And if everything looks good, then go ahead and tighten those screws a little bit more. We'll do one final round of checking. At this point, if your timing still looks good, go ahead and put maximum torque on these screws to set this as firmly as possible so the rotary hook does not slip out again. And it's a good idea to check one more time once you finally tighten the screws, just to verify the position and gap.